Afternoon. I guess I have to, oh, there we go. Wait for the music to go down and the mic to come up. Hi, I'm Janice Price. I'm the CEO of the Luminato Festival, and welcome to TimesTalks Luminato, our first of our four-part TimesTalks series. So we are now in day 3 of this year's festival, and we've already witnessed an amazing, captivating array of performances and events. Anybody already been to some events at the festival, down to the hub? Good, great, excellent. Well, I hope, or you may already know, someone left their glasses here, probably Daniel, that one of the touchstones of the festival is transformation. And over the course of the festival, the city will witness true transformation of many of our public spaces, our parks, our theaters, and more. We welcome artists from all over the world, and we are featuring a range of Canadian, North American, and international premieres at the festival this year. So today we will we'll provide you an opportunity to find out more about what motivates and inspires singer, songwriter, and Canadian music, I'd say international music icon, Daniel Lanois, moderated by our esteemed colleague from the New York Times, Bruce Headlam. He really does need no introduction, but Daniel Lanois is the definition of multi-talented. He's a producer, a guitarist, and a singer who has worked with some of the best and most important artists in the world. And for Luminato, working with the New York Times has allowed this and the other TimesTalks to reach even larger audiences through insightful discussions with leading artists and thinkers, all hosted by a representative from the New York Times. Now, events like this would not be possible and the entire festival without your support, the audience, our many wonderful corporate partners, our arts partner, the New York Times. There's still many more Luminato Festival events to come, so pick up one of the many brochures sitting around the room. Please join us at another activity or event throughout the festival. So it is now my pleasure to introduce the festival's prestigious partner and collaborator in this very special program of talks. Please welcome from the New York Times, Carol Day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Janice. It's great for the New York Times to be here in Toronto for the Luminato Festival, and it's wonderful working with Janice and all of her staff. We're also really excited to be able to have this TimesTalks at Luminato streaming live on timestalks.com today. We're very excited to have such amazing, distinguished musical artists here, and you're going to hear much more about them and from them and about their work in just a second from our moderator. He's currently New York Times managing editor of video, which is a major part of how we tell the news today. Whether reporting on conflicts abroad and political divisions at home, or covering the latest style trends and scientific developments, our Times video journalists tell the stories of our day in compelling, moving pictures. And he's the person who manages it all and all of them, from the news of the world to sports to health to arts and to music. Please join us in welcoming Bruce Headlam and our very special guests, Daniel Lanois, Hal Willner, the Handsome Family, and Alistair Roberts.
I'm there, yes. Well, I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm there. I'm here.
All right.
Yeah.
The mics are working? Are they?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. If you are like me and you were lucky enough to grow up in this part of the country, 30 years ago or so, and you were listening to the radio, you started to hear new sounds from bands like Parachute Club and Martha and the Muffins and others. And if you were like me, you didn't suspect that a lot of those sounds were coming out of the basement of the Lanois family in Hamilton, Ontario. And if you had a cool older brother, as I did, who was listening to Brian Eno, you didn't realize that some of those same sounds are coming from the same place. As Carol said, Daniel Lanois went on to produce some of the biggest albums really of the last 30 years, some of the biggest artists, and I think at times that has overshadowed his own work as a songwriter. Fortunately, we have a remedy for that, and that is Hal Willner, who has probably done more in terms of bringing attention to the actual craft of songwriting through the many, many tribute albums he has produced and events that he has thrown, artists, all kinds of artists, Kurt Weill, Walt Disney songs. He even did one for Edgar Allan Poe. And in 2 days, is it? Tuesday night, I think they're going to be, he's going to be presenting the songs of Daniel Lanois, featuring just an incredible array of artists. And we're lucky that 3 of them are here with us. First, we've got Brett and Rennie Sparks, who you know as the Handsome Family, the wonderful American band, and the really incredible Scottish singer, Alistair Roberts, who's here as well, and who is in fact, even though he is Scottish, he said, I was talking to him backstage, he's going to sing one of Daniel's French songs with a Scottish accent. And I said, well, in English Canada, that's just about the way all of us do it, so he should feel right at home. So to start with, I wanted to talk mainly about your songwriting. And people knew you as a producer, Daniel, but really the first glimpse they got of you as a songwriter was the song Jolie Louise, which I think was it may have been your first single, but it was a very popular song, and as I remember it, the only thing on Much Music like that at the time. And it, in fact, was a song about your family. And can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a song I wrote about the migration of my family from Quebec to Ontario. Split up of my parents, really. At a time when, at a moment when my mom had had enough, she just packed the 4 kids up and drove to Hamilton, where we settled. And my father scooped us back, and then my mom stole us back one more time, and that was kind of the end of the volley. This was all before court. Lucky for me, courtrooms didn't make any decisions about how our family should deal with its problems. So I like that to this day, that my mother said, that's it. And then, but I decided to mix the 2 languages in this song, French and English. I thought it was the best way to tell the story. And, you know, it's a song that tells a lot in just 4 verses. You know, boy meets girl, they get married, he promises to work every day, he loses his job, hits the bottle, hits my mother, that's the end of it. So it's just kind of I realized then the power that's available to us as songwriters to say a lot in just a 3-minute song. It takes films a couple of hours to tell a story, but we, with song, can do it in 3 minutes. It's a fascinating medium. And so I became interested in the form through life experience. And so that Jolie Louise, I think, touched people's hearts because it came from a true story. And
it was also told from the point of view of your father.
That's right, yes. I thought he was sort of the silent voice, so I would, I mean, he might have, you know, hit the alcohol, but he loved his children, so I just wanted to get that across, you know, in the song.
How did he respond to the song?
I think he liked it, you know. I wasn't in touch with him very much around that time. He was oblivious to a lot, you know. He might not have known it was about him.
It reminded me of a McGarrigle song, in that and the McGarrigles are famous for this, they kind of work out their family issues in songs.
Oh, okay. I never thought of it that way, but that's one way to, I suppose, you could, it's some way of meeting on neutral ground, I don't know how to respond to that, just, it's an exorcism, I suppose. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
You had, I think most people here would think, a very old-fashioned childhood. There wasn't a lot of, as you describe in your book, which, by the way, I recommend your book to absolutely everybody here. It's a wonderful book on many, many levels. But you had you were living in a cabin in Quebec for one summer, 3 kids, largely unsupervised, although you had 3 shotguns, which I thought was the most interesting.
Yeah, right. No, it was a Winchester 303 and a long 22.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
But you had a very, so I'm wondering from that child, where did the kind of 2 things, your incredible curiosity about things come from, and your comfort with mechanical things? If you do read his book, it's almost a treatise on the physics of sound. There's a lot of fascinating things in the book about that. How did you, lots of kids heard sounds around them. You tried to figure out how to take that apart. Where did that come from?
Well, I fell in love with music at a very young age. I was about 8 or 9 years old. But I also got to spend a lot of time on my own. And so, and it was a very kind of restricted environment. There was not a lot of culture in the house. We didn't have a lot of books or records or anything. It was just, I delivered the morning paper. And I talked to Bob Dylan about this a couple of months back, and he said he had a very quite isolated childhood where he, all he had was radio. He never saw any pictures of any people, any entertainers, and so he was able to build everything up in his mind, which is what happened to me. I just started training my imagination at a very young age, and by delivering the morning paper, I had a couple of hours by myself without any adult supervision. And then my mom went to work, and then I worked after school, and then I might see her a little bit at night, so there was a lot of time alone. So I got to, it was kind of a self-education that allowed me to blossom in my own way. And so I'll be forever grateful to have had that, what seemed like a, somebody might have said, oh, that poor kid's having to work, and he's got no parents around. But it might have been a blessing that, in disguise, that really helped me broaden my scope. And then I started asking questions as I was delivering the paper. What are those wires for? And what kind of voltage is in there? And what is this one? Is that a telephone? Blah, blah, blah. So I just started asking technological questions because some of my customers were industrialists. I delivered a paper to a place called Greening Donald in Hamilton. I wondered, what's Greening Donald? I see these big spools of wire in the back. So what are they doing with all this wire? And so I was curious of where are the trains going? The trains would go by, the TH&B. What's TH&B? Toronto, Hamilton, Buffalo. Okay. And then there'd be another one from out west, and then I became interested in trade and where things were going. And I'd see cars going this way and boats going that way. And I thought, so I became interested in economy and trade and the movement of pieces that were popular and how people integrated and so and it was the same thing with music. I didn't hear a lot of music, but I heard really good music on radio when I was a kid. There was some excellent, the hit parade was just full of it's kind of a soul music explosion. So we heard a lot of the great music. I heard Detroit radio and Buffalo radio in Hamilton. So I got to hear all the great soul artists of the time, and I got to hear James Cotton when I was a kid, and Muddy Waters, and then the Motown hits, and so I got to hear some of the best stuff of that era, and that's what got to me. I thought, whoa, how are they doing that? And I heard bass lines that touched my heart. And then I got to work with Rick James, when I had my little studio going. He came in from Buffalo. Man, he was a monster. It was like me being in a room with Beethoven, because in 20 minutes he had a track pouring out of the speakers. It was staggering. And we didn't have that kind of not that kind of talent in our immediate neighborhood. We had great folk singers and great storytellers, but we didn't have those kind of bass players.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the beginning of my education, like a way of seeing how other people were doing things outside of my immediate environment.
Yeah. I was wondering, how did your mother feel about having Rick James in the basement?
My mother
And
loved.
by the way, that should be a song. Rick James is in my basement.
My mother loved all the action that was happening. We had a lot of we recorded a lot of Jamaican music. I was connected with a gospel music association that brought quartets, a cappella quartets in from all over the world, and one of their stops was my studio. So we made a record with these groups in 2 days, and I made dozens and dozens and dozens of gospel records as a teenager.
Is that right?
Yeah, man.
And you,
Yeah, that's the studio right there.
oh, that is.
That's my TAC 4-track. It was an incredible machine, half-inch. I wish I still had it. What I did with that is I'd record the band on 3 tracks and then transfer all that to the 4th track, giving me 3 more blank tracks to work with. And you see the Revox 2-track machine right next to it. We had that synchronized on one start button. So if we had like strings built up on the 4-track, we could transfer them to the 2-track, store them, use up the string tracks for other overdubs, and then we have one start button with a chalk mark on each tape recorder. Okay, doof. And then they would just, both of them would start up together, and that's how we did the mix. It was a 6-track system.
Okay, but you could have just explained sort of nuclear fission to me. So how does a 16-year-old kid, you weren't learning this in physics class at school. How were you learning this? Where were you getting this equipment, that experience?
I learned by myself and with my brother Bob. I never worked in a studio. I tried to get a job in a couple of places, but that didn't pan out. So I just bought some of my own equipment and started.
What was your first piece of equipment?
My first piece of equipment was the very first one was just a little flea market machine, that had one microphone and it had speakers on board and everything. Just press record and record voices, me and my friends, and then play it back. And that sounded good. Oops, my beads are touching the microphone. Then I got a Roberts tape recorder, about this big. It was a quarter track. Quarter track means you can flip the tape over and record more music on the other side, And then following that, I got a Sony TC630, which had this amazing device on it. It had a sound on sound. So you record everybody on the left channel, click the button over, and everything would go to the right channel with a new overdub. Then you could go back to the left and back to the right and keep going. And the genius of that being that the fidelity reduced, you lost high frequency every time you went a generation. But the new information was full fidelity. So that meant that the original parts were a little more dark, leaving room for the new front information. So the vocals were bright and the background was dark. So it was a beautiful way to have a kind of a self-mixing, self-balancing system. It's a hard lesson to learn because with modern equipment, everything is bright, everything's on the same plane, so you come mix things like, geez, how are we going to darken these components? We got to EQ and everything. So that taught me a lesson about limitation. That limitation allowed me to have a certain house sound. Yeah, there we go.
And you,
getting a little
before we
technical.
get more to your songs, if we're going to talk about sound, I just want to talk a little bit about when you met Brian Eno and what that was like.
Well, meeting Brian Eno was a turning point in my music life because.
And how old were you when you?
I look pretty young there, don't I? I got chipmunk a little bit. I looked 12, but I think I was 30 years old. My skills were very high when I met Brian, but my direction was not great. I was all over the place. I mean, I had produced a few good Canadian records, but I had not really devoted myself to a particular path. And that's what was great about meeting Brian, that he had already made that decision for himself, that he was okay making records that were regarded to be obscure by record companies. He didn't care. He just wanted to make music that was the most touching to him. And I really stood by his side, and we made, maybe in this studio you're looking at here, maybe half a dozen ambient records. And it really changed the way that I thought. And I vowed after making one record with Brian, I vowed to never do anything else that I didn't want to do. You know, I didn't want to just be a studio dog, because up to that point I was just, because I come from a poor background, so we had no money, so I had to really work like a dog to, you know, sometimes I'd be recording something that I didn't like very much and paid the bills, and I was able to buy some equipment. But at this point we have pretty good equipment. As you can see, that's an MCI 500 console in front. And now they've moved on to Ireland. Well, Brian had just done Remain in Light in New York, and you know, My Life in the Bush Ghost, and recorded Devo, worked with Bowie, so he was really at the top of his field. And there was a phone call that came in to produce a new Irish band. Then a tape was sent, we listened to it. He said, no, I don't really want to produce anything right now. I said, well, Brian, I'm just getting started. Could you at least make an introduction? And then, because I'd like to work with them, you know, because the singer could sing really high. I thought it was kind of cool. And so he agreed to make an introduction, and we went to Ireland, and that's how we got started with U2. So I was just tagging along, man, you know.
Well, this is where I want to pull in Hal, because one thing you seem to do in your recording is you don't like being in studios. You like creating studios in different spaces. And it's almost as though you almost create a studio like it's a film set. People kind of show up and sort of work almost in a remote location. You've done it in California.
That's a nice way to describe it, like a film set.
And how that's something you throw events too. You pull people together, you make them sing. What, you make them sing? You have them.
Well, it's not.
You make them sing. How? But it's similar in that.
Island of Lost Souls? Or is it
the
House of Pain?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway.
At any rate, what is it about trying to get people is it a way of getting people out of their comfort zone? What is it that works about that?
Well, every one of these things is approached differently. It's creating, to use a 60s terms, a happening mixed with, say, once it's also a cinematic way, say the way Robert Altman, who I got to work with, worked with actors and people. He set up a very, very strong framework. And within that, you know, just to sit back and it's kind of like montage and watch how this group of people kind of work together. I mean, my background, I really came out, I'm 58. I would say it's a vaudevillian, like a full meal approach. I remember going to the Fillmore to see Led Zeppelin when I was in high school. The opening artists were Rahsaan Roland Kirk and the Bonzo Dog Band. So to me, that's how it, you know, watching the Smothers Brothers, which I love comedy, seeing the Buffalo Springfield doing For What It's Worth. Going, so it was, you know, a mixture of that, of seeing every type of music and where it meets within a place. So having a group of people together, this is in the live thing that one would never really see in a room together, but it's, and you hope to find, and the common thing is there's something in my instinct that says something could happen with all these people. I mean, the first time I worked with Daniel was on a TV show that we had called Night Music. I remember where it was Daniel and Sonic Youth, and I think Miles was there the week before, and the Indigo Girls and Diamanda Galas. And then, you know, at the end, so everyone does their thing and then came together to do, you know, I Want to Be Your Dog. And, you know, out of this, you come like, you know, experiencing a lot. So, you know, we hope to create a very safe environment in these where people then they realize this is not your show. This is about a journey looking at a composer's work that can handle all different types of approaches. We'll go into the Disney one, for example, where you had Ringo doing When You Wish Upon a Star, like it was in the style of Good Night, and then Tom Waits' Hi Ho, which almost got us sued. His concept was Hi Ho in prison, you know. So, and the body of work has to be, and Daniel's was perfect. It just can take this kind of journey.
Now, is it trickier to create that safe atmosphere when the artist isn't there? Because you're going to be there. You know, Harold Arlen was dead, so
yeah,
it's a little
well,
easier
I
in
always
that
just
case.
say, yes, working with dead artists is a little easier. No, you know, I said I did this Lenny Bruce compilation, and go, Lenny Bruce was, no, he was fine, you know. You're like, we'll do right. Or a lot of times the artists, like Randy Newman actually called and asked me to do one, and then as it came together, he got weirded out and, you know, like, wouldn't come. Did the next night himself. The only artist that's ever been at one of these shows was Bill Withers, which is weirdly a weird one. And one of the reasons it appealed to me, because I didn't know his work well, except for the hits at all. Didn't even like a lot of it. So I thought this is perfect. You know, like the audience will come with me to learn about this artist. And he just, you know, he only came up anyway. And, you know, he realized in a different way what his songs were, hearing it done by avant-gardists like Henry Grimes, you know, and Jim James, I believe, was there, a Morning Jacket, and his daughter. The only thing he was missing is just the two of us. She jumped up to sing. And then Cornell Dupree, the great guitarist, was there. He passed away since on an oxygen tank and played Grandma's Hand. So it's, you know, the concept is the music that you're doing, and you're creating a film. So it's when they understand that, it's.
Well, we should ask the artists how safe they feel.
We don't feel
being
safe.
up on stage, being up on stage with Daniel, and how you approach this project. First of all, what song are you doing?
Well, we're not sure yet. We haven't really started rehearsing, so we've got a few
We got a few they've been running.
that we've been working on. Yeah, we've been working on The Maker, and we've been working on Tears Roll By. What else have we been working on? And,
Willie Nelson
Willie
song.
Nelson, yeah.
A murder ballad, a lovely
Yeah.
murder ballad off Teatro.
I just can't say goodbye.
Shows sometimes are like falling, but you know, you get a parachute, so it's all right.
Okay.
You'll be okay.
They've been in a few
but
bars.
nonetheless,
Right.
They were in the Harry Smith, the first
Of
one
course.
we did.
we've done a lot of.
Yeah.
Shel Silverstein,
Yeah.
There's
Oh, you did.
Leonard Cohen, we did
We have
that.
done it.
yeah, there's a
And,
bit of juggling.
There's something about maybe the fear that is enticing in a way, I think. Because I always, as we're packing to go, I always say, why are we doing this? This is hard, this is scary, but maybe that's why we're doing it, is because it is isolating, I think, just to play your own songs and do your own tours. And somehow this is much harder, but also
It's a very-
brings you to some new places.
It's a very different experience to what we're used to doing, which is our thing, and being very controlled, and even knowing down to what kind of gauge of strings that I'm going to be using on a tour, to have everything very organized and very certain, like even set list with very little variation. To do something with so much built-in uncertainty is, you know, interesting things can happen,
Right.
and that's good.
And when how many songs did you look at when you've done several of these?
I'm familiar with Daniel's music, so
Yeah, we've been
I
listening
knew
to a lot.
almost, well, you can't say all of the stuff he's produced, that would be almost impossible. But the major things, and his music itself I was pretty familiar with. So, so everything, but I just kind of say, what can I bring something to this song? Or
Yeah,
Hal will
there's no
suggest
point in
something.
just covering the
I mean,
song.
suggestions are good too, but
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you listen to a body of work that large, and you're going to have to make some kind of personal decisions,
Yeah.
obviously. Like, yeah, staying a little bit away from the French side because I don't want to massacre the language.
That's where Alistair's
That's
braver
where,
than you.
that's where the Scotsman comes in, too.
Well, yeah, it was funny, I was sitting at home in my kitchen in Glasgow in Scotland playing Daniel's songs, and for some reason this song, Oh Marie, from your first album really appealed to me. I studied French in high school. I speak a bit. I'm probably going to need some advice on the pronunciation. But there's something about that song that reminded me in a way of some Scottish songs, or particularly Scottish Gaelic kind of work songs and things, and just in terms of the feel of it and the kind of repetition and the simplicity. So that's why it appealed to me, and also just the challenge of singing in a language that I've not really sung in before.
I wanted to ask Daniel, if you read Daniel's book along with Bob Dylan's book, you get two very fascinating complementary versions of making of the first album you made with him, which was Oh Mercy.
Yes.
You very much needed him to be part of the group and working with the group, and he seemed to very much want to be alone in his telling. He needed to sort of get away from things in order to kind of find his muse. When you're working with people, how do you, and I think this is something that just isn't for music, I think it's something that would, for anybody who's got a job or is looking after people, how do you manage that? Those seem like contradictory demands.
Well, the record was made in a very simple manner. Bob had stopped in on the Neville Brothers session. I was making a record with the Neville Brothers, a record called Yellow Moon, and Bob stopped in and really liked what was going on. And I had built the studio just down the street from where the brothers were living on Balance Street. And he liked what he heard, and he said, okay, let's make a record together. And he said, I'd like to do it in New Orleans. So I said to him, well, I'll set the whole thing up, and you just need to turn up. You don't even need to bring any instruments, and I'll have everything organized. So that's how it was done. And I had established some connections with local talent, including Willie Green, who plays drums with the Nevilles. So I had a drum kit there, and everything set up, but I decided to make the record in a very quiet way. I wanted to make the record for Bob to occupy the center of the picture. And I did that by pretty much cutting the bulk of the record to a Roland 808, which is a beatbox. It's kind of a famous beatbox. You hear it on Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing. It was one of the early hits using that box. And so I set up a monitor for Bob, a big Electro Voice stage monitor in front of him, and I piped that box to him. And it was just, we sat there like, you're Bob, I'm me, and there's the speaker, and we just pretty much recorded the record that way. And then Bob would leave, and I would then do all the overdubs in his absence.
Right.
I played all the bass. So that's how we did it. It might be the reverse of what you said, because Bob had been used to having quite big groups around.
Right.
Historically, and this record was the opposite. It was a very, it was more singular, and consequently, we got a really great sound in his voice because there was not a lot of sound going on in the room. We were able to concentrate on I had a very nice Japanese microphone that I got from Massey Hall in Toronto. Actually, they refurbished the place. I bought the two old C37As, and it turned out to be a really good choice. Tube mics, and you can get really close on them without them collapsing. So I got this really big, beautiful, full sound on Bob's voice. And I was able to concentrate on his lyrics and work with him. I was able to be his mate, with certain amendments. He would ask for my opinion, and I gave him my opinion, and he would do always the opposite. So when I caught on to that, I would always say what I didn't want to have, and then I get what I wanted. So.
He said in his book that you're like Sam Phillips. You push artists to their psychological edge. Do you feel that way?
Well, I'll take that as psychology is a big part of record making. I mean, you might choose a selection of songs and think, well, that's it. Let's just get the best renditions we can. But I think part of the process is to understand what people are going through emotionally at a given time, where they're at in their life, the psychology of their travels, and because a record is meant to be a snapshot of what's happening to an artist at a given time. So I've always made an effort to understand what's been going through somebody's body and somebody's mind at that time, and make sure that gets represented in the record. So it's not just about choosing the best songs and let's get people into play and that's the record. So the listeners feel soul and passion and commitment and tenderness and anger, all the emotions that people feel from a record come from what I'm talking about. So you have to really embrace an artist as a whole being, and not just here's a bunch of songs and let's get them as good as we can.
Are there times you just think you can't match their expectations for what they want from a record? I'm thinking of the big Peter Gabriel record you did, which was a huge success, but you know, at that point he was a sort of pale private school kid who'd done a lot of very complicated music, who was literally recording in a dairy barn. And I mean, did he sit down and say, I want to make a great soul record, I want to be Otis Redding?
No, he didn't say that.
Then how did it end up there?
Doesn't sound like Otis Redding.
Well, Otis Redding.
You mean like Sledgehammer?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the horns were the Memphis horns. Maybe that's
Right.
what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It just started in this very pedestrian way. You know, I just listened to what he had in terms of ideas, and that's another one of those records. It was all cut to a beatbox, and so I always come back to more mechanical parts of the process. We decided not to have a rhythm section with us because we didn't want all that hullabaloo at the beginning because the songs were not completed. So I wanted to make sure that Peter's thing was very much in the foreground, so we cut the whole record to a beatbox. I mean, the R&B aspect, I think that's really only on Sledgehammer, you know. We just had that little line, you know, the kind of a fast tonguing on the horns, and Peter thought we should invite the Memphis horns. But there was only one guy from Memphis. The other two guys were from New York. So, and we cut it.
It was the Memphis horn.
The Memphis horn. We cut the horns at the power station in New York City, which was very exciting for us because we'd been in this cattle barn, as you pointed out, literally cows on the window. But probably the greatest, what served us best on that record was the concentration and the commitment, because we were isolated in a country setting in the west part of England. And I just made a point of really devoting myself to him for a year of my life. I slept in the studio and talked to no one. And so I mean, not to be seemingly over-sacrificial, but I stopped living for myself and I lived for Peter, and I vowed that we would make a masterpiece. And so I did the best I could to reach that goal of masterpiece. You know, the full broad array of emotions. You know, some very tender moments on that record, and there's some funny moments. Sledgehammer, you know, obviously, you know, it's got a little wink in its eye, and great visual work. I appreciated that Peter had an interest in visuals, and was pretty much had a finger on the pulse of what was happening in England in terms of, you know, videographic work. And so it was a great fertile time, but I'll just say it one more time, without the commitment it wouldn't have happened. And he got me at the right time, and I loved him like a brother. And
But you don't write very much in your book about your own songwriting, and I want to open this for everyone to talk about. How is it possible to do so much work for other people? When do you get the time to write for yourself?
Well, it's an interesting question, because, you know, I never wrote songs till I was in my 30s, and I was kind of just servant to other people, and It's just what I did, you know.
Was it just one day you were strumming a guitar? Did the sound come first?
I
or
think
did
I
the
was
idea
just so
first come?
insecure my entire life that I didn't want to write songs, and I thought, I didn't feel it was my position to write songs because there were so many great songwriters that I was working with. I thought, well, what am I going to do? I became a master recordist as a teenager, and I thought, well, I'm a good guitar player, and I'll just serve these other people. I love the medium, and I love helping people. And
then how did you overcome that?
When I worked with Brian Eno, a lot came into focus because, as I said earlier, I found a direction that I could really sink my teeth into this, and it was just kind of a revelation for me to understand that I didn't have to be slave to an industry or to bill paying. And you know, I had a mortgage, 17% mortgage that I had to pay. You know,
Early 80s,
people are lucky
yeah.
now, 2-3%. Yeah, try 17 on for a while, and that was a second mortgage, and so you know, it was really tough, and I just had to pay bills. I just had to work, and I even had a little advertising company. It doesn't get talked about much because it's a bit embarrassing, but you know, I used to write jingles to make money, and so when I found a way of devoting myself to pure music, that's when everything changed. And it just took me that long. And maybe there's some kind of wisdom to the process. Maybe I was really good by the time I was 30, you know. I mean, I was good as a kid, but by the time I hit 30, I was razor sharp. I was the best editor, and I could really bring something to the table. And then Brian Eno's wife asked me if I wanted to make a record because she was representing me at the time. They started a nice little label called Opal Records. And she said, well, would you like to make a record? I had never thought about it. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try, man. And so I went to New York and bought some equipment on 48th Street. I just went to one shopping trip, threw everything in the trunk of a cab, and I went to my apartment and I started my record. I had a 12-track Akai, and my guitar. I bought 2 guitars at We Buy Guitars on 48th Street. I had everything in an hour. I had a whole thing. I started my new life, and it was great. I went in there in my windowless apartment, and I monitored through a blaster, a nice Sansui blaster, and it was right there. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start. And I started, and I found a beautiful guitar sound. I thought, okay, this is really going someplace. And then, but I had no friends or anything, and so I'd walk around, and I thought, I don't know, I feel a little bit lost. So I picked up a magazine, and there was a beautiful spread on New Orleans. Beautiful black and white photographs of New Orleans. I thought, wow, this looks incredible. You know, the people on the streets are alive, there's music, and I remember, oh, geez, I love the Meters. Maybe I could have a chance to, you know, meet some of those guys, because, as I said, where I grew up in Hamilton, there was no bass, really, other than Rick James coming over. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go to a place that is reliable in bass. I'm going to take the thing that I'm worst at, and I'm going to become the best at it. That's what I decided. So I went down there, and I got to work with George Porter from the Meters. Right. And I got to hear marching bands. And I thought, where I came from, marching bands, not to pick on the Scotsman, but then when I got down there, it was I thought, that's where the bass comes from. Mm-hmm. It comes from the tuba. I thought, okay, that's an eye-opener. And so marching bands were funky, and I loved all that down there. And then I met the Neville Brothers and started with that. So I'm just saying all this because you have to wait, or I had to wait for the right times in my life to take advantage of an availability, and I had to do my preparations to qualify for such an opportunity for me to embrace an opportunity and do something about it. And it just took me that long to be able to write songs. And by being away from Canada, then I thought, okay. And I started remembering the stories from when I was a kid, and that's where I wrote Jelly Louise and songs about travel and songs about tobacco picking. Both my brothers picked tobacco. So I knew a lot about regional culture, and I never thought it was that interesting when I was in Canada, but when I moved away, I thought, okay, well, tobacco picking, that's fascinating. The French Canadians pick the tobacco for the Anglos because they don't have enough work in Quebec. So they come to the tobacco picking territory, they work like dogs, and they hope to come back and impress their girlfriends with some argent, with some money. I thought, okay, well, that's a song right there. And so on and so on. So I had nothing, I couldn't see what was in front of me until I left.
Is it the same for the rest of you? Do you need to get out of your environment?
I think I had a very similar experience. I grew up in Texas in the Southwest, and I always listened to like classical music and pop music, and I never really appreciated country music. I always stayed as far away from it as possible. When I was a kid, you know, it was my father's music. And then when I moved to New York, and I was completely isolated from that music, and I first heard Hank Williams and Carl Smith and Sun Session stuff and Johnny Cash, it was like punk rock. It was a bolt out of the blue. It just completely blew me away, and you know, became essentially a part of my voice. But I don't think if I would have ever left the Southwest, I probably would never have had that experience. You know.
Well, for me, I mean, my father, Alan, was a folk singer and guitarist in Glasgow and then in Germany in the 60s and 70s. So I kind of grew up with this Scottish traditional music, but when I was in my teens or in my 20s and I started making music, I kind of rejected it. But it was something that in more recent years I've returned to and kind of started to explore a lot more thoroughly, this kind of Scottish tradition, you know. And I think that's something about that song, to go back to that song of Daniel's, O Marie, that appealed to me. I was interested to know the extent to which you feel like explorations of the traditions from your area kind of influenced you. You know, you talked about hearing Motown music on the radio and stuff, but in terms of like sort of more things that were happening locally, you talked about some storytellers and local folk singers. Was that something that interested you at the time?
Well, I always recorded folk singers, and I admired that, I felt that they were speaking the truth. And so the authenticity of it appealed to me. You know, I was just kind of servant to the process and always very supportive, but I think quite early on I recognized that some artists were driven by the right reasons, and you know, and I guess that gets under one's skin and provides an education. It provides a standard to operate by when you hit your own music. You know.
You mentioned country music, and an interesting part in your book is when you started playing steel guitar. You said you wanted to be the guitarist for Dolly Parton. I don't know if you've ever worked with Dolly Parton, but would you play a little steel guitar for us right now?
Yeah, I'll play a little bit. I played already, but I'll play again. You know. I'll play for the camera this time, and for everybody else. So this is the very guitar I got when I was a kid. I used to play in a band on Yonge Street, a place called the Brown Derby, and next door was a country place called the Edison. There was a great steel guitar player there by the name of Bob Jussier, French-Canadian guy, and I got to meet him, and he said, "I'll get you a steel guitar and I'll teach you." I still have the same one. So I'll start with this opening part, which is a piece that I designed, inspired by Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings, and then evolved into this 6/8 number called JJ Leaves LA.
That was incredible.
As you can hear, I've decided to explore the opposite ends of the dynamic spectrum, where you can really hear sort of the raindrop sounds or the pin drop, quiet sound, delicate touch of the fingers, and then by pushing the envelope, it can also go into this more shattered glass and metal place, which interests me just as much as the delicate part of things. So I've got a little noisy, I know, but I just wanted you to hear the potential of this instrument, but more importantly, the potential that lives in people's hearts to investigate the full spectrum of emotion that's built into us as human beings, the very things that we have to live through, you know, to be kind and to be sweet, and then there's war, and then there's, you know, we are very, very complex as cultures and as people. So for that to be represented on records, I think is a big part of what we love about records, you know.
Is that something you consciously strive for in your records?
I think it's necessary to investigate the full emotional capacity of an artist on a record, whatever that might be. You know, it doesn't mean to say that they're going to get as noisy as what I just played, but it means that any individual who is intelligent and has devoted a life to music has the capacity to emote in a very broad spectrum. And I think it's necessary to investigate the full potential of that with an artist. Yeah.
Does that mean sometimes pushing them into places they don't want to go?
I don't think it means pushing people. I think it means for them to understand, to see perhaps another window to look through. I would never push people, but I might make something available to them that they had not seen before by providing another angle on a piece of music that, you know, they might have thought, well, it should go this kind of way, and then you know, with a little bit of work and preparation, you know, maybe suggesting another direction that would be a sort of a lovely eye-opener for them, and perhaps a welcome sight to somebody who is used to doing things in a certain manner. Not to suggest that they need to change, you know, but just to provide another palette of colors sonically that might inspire them to get to another level of artistry.
I want to talk, because this is about your songs, maybe ways in which some of the artists you've worked with have opened your eyes. Have you learned about songwriting? Yeah. I mean, for example, are there specific lessons you learned from working with U2, for example?
Well, the thing that I learned about U2 is they always had, speaking of dynamic range, much like what we're doing here, sitting around with some guitars and trying out ideas, and everything's quite considerate and intellectual. And then the engine room, which I call it the open hearth, which is a reference to the steel mills where I grew up. You go down into the open hearth and you have to wear like this fireproof suit to get through you know, a song. And that's where the volume comes up, and you can really hear where those guys came from as kids. You know, that they had the hearts of lions, and they wanted to rock out, and you know, and then there's kind of sort of the collision of harmonics that happens in a room like that it's beyond explanation how it can even happen, and it's wonderful when it does. So so I was able to experience the incredible dynamic that they operate by, and it's usually that way. You know, you want the shattered metal and, you know, the broken glass and things to be out of control, and then, you know, if you're lucky enough to hit on something that's really special, then you harness that and you say, okay, given that we have this now, how can we now apply the intellect to the physical process that we've just been through? And I think that's where they have done some of their best work, the combination of the two rooms.
Before we get to audience questions, I do want to ask you about the influence just of two other artists you've worked with, Ron Sexsmith and Bob Dylan, on your own songwriting.
Well, Ron Sexsmith is a great Toronto songwriter, and I work with him in Kensington Market and we worked on this beautiful song called One Drum, and mix, work and mix, and then I'd walk him to the bus, because the secret to Ron's, why he's so prolific, is he never drove a car. So he wasn't wasting any time at the wheel, but he delivered the mail. So he was a little bit like me. I delivered the Globe and Mail morning paper, and he delivered the mail. And he was always looking at letters. He'd look at a letter and say, Lebanon, Tennessee, that there would be such a place in Tennessee called Lebanon. It was fascinating, and he wrote a song called Lebanon, Tennessee. So he was able to, or he'd walk by the cemetery and write a song about cemetery. So he rode the bus everywhere and wrote about people. So he allowed himself enough time to experience everyday life, where songs come from.
And is that something you've taken to heart?
No. No, I'm a motorcycle rider to this day.
Okay.
I got my posse. We started a little motorcycle club. Those are my buddies there in the back.
Yeah, they didn't look like they came here on the bus.
Yeah. No, we travel together. We have a little motorcycle club called the Acme Paint Company.
Oh, okay.
Go figure.
Well, we know how that ends.
But anyhow, it's my way of keeping in contact with the street, I suppose, as Ron obviously did. He chose his own direction, and is a very sweet man with a big imagination. Makes me jealous.
And Bob Dylan, did you learn anything specific from him?
Nah. Can't think of anything. Well, hey man, I got to sit next to the man himself for the making of a couple of records, and it was a very fascinating lyrical pilgrimage to go through, and for a French-Canadian kid who grew up in Hamilton to be exposed to pretty high-level lyric writing was a great inspiring time for me, and I'm so glad that I had that experience. And what can you say? Not many people have that opportunity. So it gave me a lot of confidence in my own writing, and I got to see where a lot of Bob's inspirations came from. I don't think it's anything new. I can say that, my name, it means nothing, and my age even less. And the country I come from was called the Midwest. I was born and brought up to the laws to abide, but the land that I live in has God on its side. That's an old Irish traditional melody that Bob adapted. I think it was called The Patriot originally.
Did you record that with Aaron?
I recorded God on Our Side with Aaron Neville. But the point being that, I was able to see where Bob got a lot of his inspiration by, studying the classics, and he was, there was not a misspent youth in the pool hall with Bob. He was in the library and listening to some of the greats. So as Bob, provided himself with those kind of inspiration, I was able to be at Bob's side to then be the next generation of recipient of some kind of that kind of knowledge.
For many people, working with Bob Dylan would scare them from writing. You wanted to write, and what is it in you that picks up that challenge?
I'm wearing this little piece of jewelry here that stands for one's capacity to seek the unknown, and I've always operated that way, that if somebody knows something that I don't, then I want to know that person, because that's how we get better. It's the only way you can get better. So I've always been nervous working with people, and I don't think stage fright ever goes away, that kind of stage fright. But I'm brave, and I was able to, be an equal to Bob. I felt that I was an equal to him in terms of energy, and I brought sonics to him. I brought my experience, my expertise, my devotion, and most importantly, I wanted him to be great. I was determined to make a masterpiece for Bob, and I did everything I could to do that for him. And I think he felt that in his bones, that he had finally met his match in the way of devotion.
And you made two
I made
masterpieces with Bob Dylan.
The second one.
So we're going to open it up for questions.
Yeah, man.
We've got 2 microphones set up.
Man
I've
with
been
the
asked
hat
to
over there.
say.
Sorry, Bruce.
Sorry,
Oh, sorry, I jumped in there, man.
that's all right. Questions, not speeches, I've been said to.
1974-75, I saw you perform in a band in King Eddie Hotel in Guelph, Ontario. And I had the opportunity to sit down with you during sets with a friend of yours at the time, Michael McCurley. And at that time, you stated that your favorite guitarist was Robbie Robertson. And unfortunately, at that time, I didn't have the opportunity for you to elaborate on that, or maybe the maturity to ask further questions on it. But could you elaborate on the influence of Robbie Robertson and the band?
Well, I think it needs to go beyond that. Robbie was a hero for me, not only as a guitar player, but he was a guy who came from Hagersville, half native. I'm a trickle-down native. And he was an example of somebody who, could leave the neighborhood and take an interest in music as he did, and go south and become an expert on rock and roll and blues music. And Robbie's a great musicologist. And so he was an example of somebody who went the distance, who came from a small place, and was also a great guitar player. So he was a role model for me, and lucky for me, I got to work with him. He's a great guy. Yeah, next question, please.
I'm actually curious, maybe it's for everybody up at the panel. When you approach songwriting, do you think conceptually as a whole album before you start writing? Do you think in terms of songs? Is it a musical idea that you try to expand upon, or is it a lyrical idea that you try to expand upon? Or can you talk a little bit about that process?
My writing often starts with a melody, with a nice sound on an instrument. I might pick up a dulcimer and think, oh, that's fascinating, and something will come to me because the instrument is inspiring. Separately from that, I do write lyrics that are without music, and generally in rhyme. I write free form as well, but for the songs, I might come up with a title and that resonates with me, and then just go from there. And then I might then marry those lyrics that sit in the lyric orphanage, if you want to call it that, marry them to music that lives in the music orphanage.
Can we ask the others what?
As far as like overarching concepts for a record, that's not usually something that's real intentional. I mean, a couple of times we've sat in and said, okay, we're going to do a record of love songs once. Or
The Viking record never came together.
The Viking record never really worked out, did it?
Still working on it.
The last record were all the songs were about animals. So the titles of the songs are eels, wildebeest,
But it wasn't on
ants,
purpose.
bees. But it wasn't really on purpose.
I noticed
She writes the
pattern.
lyrics, so sometimes patterns start to emerge, and you just kind of follow them. But yeah, writing concept albums isn't really. It's kind of. I don't think so.
I think the part of your brain that comes up with concepts and themes isn't really the part of your brain that writes songs, I think is the problem. It's the part that tries to understand what the song is about later. But the two are not that connected, unfortunately. Because it would be great to say, okay, Viking record, let's get that done. It doesn't work that way.
I feel like sometimes you'll write a bunch of songs and you don't really see the connections between them immediately, the conceptual connections,
Later.
until later on you realize, oh yeah, they are kind of conceptually linked, but you didn't really conceive of it that way.
That's for sure.
Daniel, I love the work you did with the Black Dub a few years ago. I wondered if you could talk a bit about the inspiration for creating the band, and will you do more work with them?
Yeah, I hadn't been in a band since I was a kid, and I thought that might be fun to do, and so I invited Brian Blade, drummer friend of mine, to be in that band. Daryl Johnson, very talented bass player and singer, and Trixie Whitley, who is a great singer and great artist. I'd known her since she was a little girl, and she had blossomed into a great singer. So I thought, okay, maybe the time is right. So that was the idea of that. And we ran into a lot of trouble, and it kind of fizzled out. You know, I had a motorcycle accident. The bass player went to jail. And Brian plays, you know, with a lot of people. Plays with Wayne Shorter. And he's got his own jazz band, and he writes his own songs. So it was the calendar. It became an impossibility by calendar, and I just decided, well, and Trixie's doing great on her own. So, and she's going to be here, you know, on Tuesday. So it'd be great to see her. And we're going to do a couple of Black Dub songs, you know. And I miss her a lot. But that's just life, you know, and people. So there it is.
Yeah, Daniel, you talked a lot about sound today, and I'm interested in your opinion about what Neil Young is doing right now. The two extremes, one, Letters from Home, the recording of that album, and then the other extreme, Pono. Do you have any opinion on what Neil Young is doing right now?
Oh, well, sound, I'm always investigating the possibility of new sounds, and I like breaking new ground with sound. And I think I've done that with this new record that I'm going to release in the fall on Anti Records. I think I've hit on some things there that have never been heard. In regards to what Neil Young is driven to do, it's just quality. He's very, very devoted to quality. So he's trying to provide people with these listening devices to kind of get back to where we were at as a culture. As I remember in the 70s, you know, like all the hi-fi shops had the best stuff, and you'd go in and check out the new electrostatic speakers and the expensive German headphones, and there was a whole culture that went with it. And it was not a disposable environment. You know, you these little buds, you know, if they break, I'll get another set. So you really cherished the equipment you had, and so I think Neil is just trying to reinstate the values that about fidelity, and bless his heart for doing it, you know.
Mr. Lanois, I noticed some of the guitar hooks that you were doing on the steel pedal thing is reminiscent of Michael Brooks' Infinite Guitar. You also done some of the same licks on Jeffrey Oriema's a song on his Night to Night album a few years back. How do you feel it's been a part of your own sound? And is it really true that you own just one of the three infinite guitars in the world after The Edge and Brooks himself?
Yeah, for those people who don't know, on a U2 song called With or Without You, there's a very high stratospheric guitar sound. That beautiful top melody. And the instrument was invented by a friend of mine in Toronto, Michael Brook. He made it available to Edge, and so Michael has one, Edge has one. I have the third one, yeah, it's true. It's a little bit like an EBow, but more interesting than an EBow because simply put, one of the pickups is a speaker. So the signal from the back pickup, I think, is the way goes to an amplifier that has no speaker, turned up really loud, and you take the speaker terminals from that, or the output of the amp, and you don't use a speaker, you wire a pickup. So the pickup is trying to be a speaker, and it's by proximity to the strings, it starts feeding back the note that you initially played back into the string, and it becomes it creates a loop. But it's a very dangerous thing. There's a lot of electricity going through it. It kind of heats up and smokes. So anyhow, it's but the steel, I'm not using any kind of device like that. I'm using more of a Jamaican technique where I'm just cranked up really loud, but I'm playing quiet. But I have the power on reserve to push the gas down, and by playing a quiet note like that, you get into this kind of infinite sustained sound. It's more of a Jimi Hendrix angle.
Premièrement, merci beaucoup d'avoir partagé. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous. I have a question. Earlier you said that you decided you're only going to do what you really love. has your interest and your tastes and what you really love gotten smaller over time? Or are you just really good at batting away everything that comes in your direction? Because it must be so difficult to choose. Or is it difficult to choose? Have you gotten narrow in what you truly love? Or, and this applies to all of the artists really, have you got a really fantastic way of deciding what's worth your time? Because whether you're a journalist or a musician or a working mother of three, you have to really decide what's worth your time. How do you do it?
Well, you're making a good point. I mean, deciding on a direction and devoting yourself to that is probably a very, very big part of getting good at something, you know. I mean, I'm not playing the clarinet. I'm playing the steel guitar. I used to play the clarinet in school, but I decided, okay, not the clarinet, I'll play the steel, and so on. But I'm very specific about how I'm going to use my time and what friends I associate with and what philosophy I embrace, and not just with music, but I have very specific views on culture and architecture and city planning, and so not that I'm all over the place, but I'm very, very specific about what I think is right. Well, city planning is something that we're all interested in our quiet living rooms, I suppose, but hey man, a city is a big place to manage, so I wouldn't want to have to do it myself. But I think that probably localizing decision-making is the future of our cities. And nobody knows in their neighborhood better than the people who live in it. So I hope it gets to that place one day.
So we've time for two more. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. The question actually came from the comment about the 17%. And I know we live in about a 2 or 3%, but when I was a young man, I had a lot of fear, and I had a lot of comments coming, and I took a certain direction based on people's advice. And I'm here with my son, and it makes me think of this question. What's the worst advice you were given? From a musical perspective and career.
Oh, I never got that much bad advice, but I had a music teacher in school who told me to stop tapping my foot. I was mystified by it, because he thought that would get in the way of my playing. And I looked at him, I thought, am I supposed to be listening to this guy? So it was pretty funny, a funny moment, Stop tapping your foot.
Hal, your worst advice?
I never took any, no, which is obvious. But I don't know what. Just to talk with something about what they said before about your tastes growing or jumping into projects. There's another way to look. I mean, one of the things Daniel's have that the few advantages one would have of not being associated with hit records, which I've been able to do through the years. But you know that when you get approached for something, you know they do want you for something you've done, not so you could get them successful. So it's, they had to fight 3 A&R guys to get to you. So some of those things, there's certain things that just sounded so bizarre to me through the years that I jumped into and became the most rewarding experiences in the middle 80s. Someone asked me to do an album with Allen Ginsberg of music. And at the time, they hadn't quite gotten their legacy in line, Burroughs and Ginsberg and all them. And it just sounded like the records made it just the worst idea possible. So I would, okay, turn this around and just put myself in that world I never would have been in. And it just became, was his, a partner of his till he passed. So I don't know, it's coming at it from a different route, and I'm very excited. Daniel and I were talking about it about right now. I think artists out there, largely because of the thing they're saying is killing with the downloads, which is a way to look at now artists that would never have gotten a deal in the old days are getting things out there and heard by a few 100,000 people. And if you really spend the time, it's an amazing time for music right now.
Brennan?
Worst advice, I guess, was write about what you know. That's just boring.
Oh.
Always better to look at the unknown.
Develop a skill to fall back on.
Yes. Yeah, right.
Bad advice?
Yeah. Never, don't need a safety net. If you have something to fall back on, you'll fall back on.
Yeah. I think he's covering his son's ears right now. And Alistair?
When I first started writing songs when I was in my teens, my father said, you know, these songs are quite good, but maybe you should get like a real singer to sing them. That just kind of encouraged me to improve.
Yeah, okay,
you know?
wow. Oh, Lord. Okay, we have time for one more.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could discuss your approach to guitar sound and the inspiration behind it, because you have a very, very unique guitar tone.
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. Probably the best way to demonstrate is to pick up the guitar. I wasn't planning on picking this up, but here we go. I'm a finger picker, so you often don't kind of tell what I'm doing because I'm So that's the basis of it. So when I'm playing, we just did a tour with Emmylou Harris. So she'll sing da 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 da. So my job is to harmonize with her. So I'm playing a harmony to her singing in a quiet way. So I think of myself as a French horn when I'm playing with Emmylou, for example. And this means that I'm not getting in her way. I'm actually supporting a harmonic. I'm providing a harmonic support for her melody. So that's kind of the basis of it. And then I play melody within. So the top part is obviously and then with the bottom I could choose to put a root in the bottom or a fifth in the bottom depending on the emotion required. So that's the basis of it. And not a lot of electric guitar players play a finger-picking style. It's just the way I learned because I studied classical and folk when I was a kid. So that was, and I just kind of stuck with it because I realized at a certain point there was a very unique thing, and it's nice to find your own voice on an instrument. So it gave me a little bit of an advantage in that direction. I wasn't always doing that, but certainly for a long time I've been doing it.
Okay, I think that was easily the best question of the day. Thank you. So before we go, I'm not going to try and sell you the New York Times. Instead, I would like all of you to read Daniel's book and buy it at an independent bookstore, not at Amazon.com. And please explore all the music of these people because it's absolutely wonderful, and I wish we had more time with all of them. But thank you all for coming, and thank you so much to Daniel and all of us.